It is unthinkable that the Jon Benet case has not yet been solved. Today, we will share possible solutions for a resolution. This case can be solved, and I'm going to tell you how, and much more, on this episode of Charlie Crime Buster. It is what some people are calling the fastest minutes in podcasting.
The views and opinions expressed in this presentation are solely those of the individuals interviewed or participating and do not represent those of city, county, state, or federal law enforcement agencies, nor sponsors and platforms of this presentation. Charlie Crime Buster, CharlieCrimeBuster.com, and PeacemakerNetwork.com are copyrights owned by Charlie Crime Buster. All individuals described or mentioned in the presentation should be considered innocent until found guilty in a court of law. This presentation contains subject matter such as violence and graphic descriptions which may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener and viewer discretion is advised.
Well, hello and welcome to the Charlie Crime Buster podcast. We're glad to have you aboard the Charlie Crime train today. We appreciate you being a part of our audience. By the way, we always encourage people to reach out with a shout-out. You can reach me, charliecrimebuster at gmail.com, charliecrimebuster at gmail.com. We're working today on a series that we've called The Unthinkable. This is part 5. The first one was about the college murders there in Idaho and the unthinkable that could happen there. And the last 4 have been about Jon Benet Ramsey and her terrible murder in 1996. We're going to continue that in just a moment, but I also would like to invite you to be a part of the show by becoming a badge supporter, B-A-D-G-E supporter. You can read all about that at PeacemakerNetwork.com. That's PeacemakerNetwork.com. There you will read about the brave men and women who run toward danger instead of away from danger. Also, if you'd like to get caught up on the episodes, our producer, James Buckland, calls it binge-casting. If you'd like to binge on all these episodes out there, there's about 200 of them, just go right on over to charliecrimebuster.com, charliecrimebuster.com. Well, now we've taken a moment to get a little bit of the housekeeping out of the way. Let's get on board the Charlie Crime train today. You know, it's been a little over 28 years since Jon Benet was brutally murdered in her home there in Boulder, Colorado. That was on Christmas night. We still do not know who really killed her, and to me, this is unthinkable. It is unthinkable that this particular case has not been solved. So we're going to share with you even more information. Today, I'm going to update you on the progress or lack of progress on the case, and also share with you how I believe this case could be solved. So let's begin by updating you. Now, perhaps you might be like me and you would like to know what the Boulder Police is doing or is not doing to solve this case. Now, we all know the Boulder Police made some major mistakes from the get-go in this case. They did not preserve the crime scene properly. They misused the press and the media. They held back pertinent information. And they developed tunnel vision. Well, that was then, but how about now? Well, now we're fortunate to have some fresh information on the case. You see, one of the things that the Boulder Police has done is to annually update on this case. And just weeks ago, the Boulder Police met with Jon Ramsey to discuss his case. But before we talk about Ramsey and his discussion with the police department, let's talk about that annual update that the police make known to the general public. You see, they released their annual update a little earlier than usual, perhaps because of the new generated increased attention on the case. From Netflix to podcasts just like this one, multitudes of people are talking about this case. So in a video update, Boulder Police Chief Stephen Redfern said, "While I was not at Boulder Police 28 years ago, I have worked in policing for more than 20 years. That's what the chief says. He went on to say, "I want to assure you that our agency is committed to doing everything we can to bring to justice the man who did this," or basically he said bring justice to Jon Benet, "and to hold her killer responsible." He went on to say a lot has changed in law enforcement since 1996. He did acknowledge that there was a number of things police could have done better while initially investigating what happened to Jon Benet. And he went on to say, however, it is important to emphasize that while we cannot go back to that horrible day in 1996, our goal is to find Jon Benet Ramsey's killer. Our commitment to that has never wavered. That's what Chief Redfern said. And then on a post on X, that's formerly known as Twitter, of course, the Boulder Police said, the assertion that there is viable evidence and leads that we are not pursuing to include DNA testing, they said it's completely false. Well, you all know that back in November 2022, the Boulder Police Department had announced a partnership with the Colorado Cold Case Review Team. They did that with a joint press release with the City of Boulder County District Attorney's Office out of the 20th Judicial District. Now, Chief Redfern said that collaborating with that cold case review team, that it resulted in a whole lengthy list of recommendations. He went on to say that the police continues to work through those recommendations. Now, that review included an intensive effort to digitize all the evidence in the case. In other words, they were going to create a search base that they could get to very quickly. He went on to explain about this that file included more than 21,000 tips, 1,000 interviews conducted across 17 states, 2 foreign countries, samples from more than 200 individuals, including handwriting, DNA, fingerprints, and shoe prints. He stated that there were over 2,500 pieces of evidence, 40,000 reports. Now get this, with more than 1 million pages documenting the investigation. That's what the chief said in his update. He said a fresh inventory of all collected evidence was made available, of course, for investigative review. He went on to say that they could not have done this without the assistance of the FBI. And then they went on to say, a spokesperson did, that this is an open and ongoing investigation, and they might not be able to provide interviews or answer specific questions at the time. But here's what he did say, getting down to the heart of the matter. Quote, I'm quoting him now. What I can tell you, though, is that we have thoroughly investigated multiple people identified as suspects throughout the years. We continue to be open-minded about what occurred as we investigate the tips that come into the detectives. He said, I can tell you, our detectives are regularly investigating some aspects of this terrible crime, and he went on to let the people know that he gets updates very, very frequently. Now, my friend, while this is a positive account of what the police are doing, I think we can go to what I call the heart of the matter, and that is the interaction that Jon Ramsey had with his own personal meeting with the Boulder Police just weeks ago. Now, during that meeting, Jon discussed how they could use genetic genealogy to test and retest DNA evidence, that, of course, in hopes of identifying the killer. He went on to say about that meeting with the Boulder Police. This is Jon Ramsey talking. Quote, I was impressed. They are not arrogant, cocky, big egos. They were eager to talk and to get the case solved and are open to all options available. Now that's what Jon Ramsey said with his most recent visit to the Boulder Police Department, where he met with the new police chief and the district attorney. Now, he mentioned that the police had received many leads after the recent uptick in all kinds of publicity. There was a Netflix documentary. There have been multiple podcasts, including this one. He also brought to that meeting a DNA expert to discuss the possibilities of working with what is called small DNA samples. Jon told Scripps News in Denver that he, quote, remains hopeful that with the use of new technology, Jon Benet's killer will eventually be identified. He went on to say, you want your child, that loss, to make a difference. How can we make the world a better place based on what we have learned? He went on to say that in that most recent meeting, and this is what's really important, he heard from the police that DNA that was recovered from his daughter's underwear could not undergo genealogy testing because the technology was not advanced enough. Now, that's according to the Denver Gazette. He said the police are reportedly keeping abreast of developments with the genealogy testing in the case. He went on to say it's not if, but when, that this would be available to get the kind of sample that they could get results with. Now, we all know that Ramsey has pressed the Boulder Police to retest evidence with updated genetic technology. The problem is with this technology is not really inside the laboratory of major law enforcement in the country. These are some private companies that have some other advanced technology that could be used to obtain new leads in their daughter's unsolved murder, in Jon's daughter's unsolved murder. He also urged not only that they look to some of these outside labs, but he also urged the FBI to make child murder a federal crime. You see, if that happens, the agency could automatically intervene with a whole lot of more resources that would be available. Now, this child murder involves cases involving children 12 years of age and younger. So in other words, somebody gets killed 12 years old and younger, it becomes a federal crime. There you have the resources of the FBI to get involved. So here's two things that Jon Ramsey has come to the police department with. He wants investigators to test the external male DNA that the federal authorities disclosed way back in 1997. So the question is, will the Boulder Police get outside the box? Will they use some of these private labs to retest, build a good sample, and then move to ancestry sites to trace down a relative of a person who could have possibly had the opportunity to commit this hideous crime? So he went with them with two things, that and also that they would work to make child murder a federal crime. Two good ask, if you please, to the Boulder Police Department from Jon Ramsey. Now, we're going to get back to this in a moment because this is very, very important. But we also would like to take time to update you on what others who were involved with the case are doing right now. But now it's time for us to take a quick break and to share with you Charlie Crimebuster's Crazy Crook of the Week. Well, in our Crazy Crook story today, there was a Colorado man. He was wanted. Oh, hold on to your hat. He was wanted for allegedly attempting to hold up a bank in a robbery. Well, it quickly went off the rails. When a teller could not read the note that he handed over. Oh, this accused would-be thief. He entered a bank in Loveland, Colorado, around 5 p.m. on December the 17th, went straight to the teller, handed the teller a note. This is according to the Loveland Police Department. But the teller, couldn't read the note. Couldn't discern exactly what was written on the note. It was impossible to read. And the teller was still trying to figure it out, what the note said, that is. The man got frustrated, and he quickly fled the bank. You see, brainless criminal wannabes, that's more common than expected, by the way, with many people accidentally, just damning themselves in the most unexpected ways. In a similar incident, a British man tried to rob a bank in East Sussex, and it was foiled by the sloppy sticky note that he slipped to the teller. The note appeared to read, "Your screen won't stop what I've got, just hand over 10/20s, think about the customers." Well, not only grammatically incorrect, but just plain unintelligible. So these crazy crooks, my friend, these crazy crooks that cannot even write a crook demand note that someone could understand, they are indeed Charlie Crimebuster's Crazy Crooks of the Week. So now we know that it appears that the Boulder Police Department are actually open to helping solve the case. And that's where they stand. But what are others now doing that were so heavily involved in this case? Well, first, an update on Patsy, Jon Benet's mother. Patsy Ramsey, as many of you already know, was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer in 1993. She was only 36 years of age at that time. After treatment, she was actually in remission. That is, until a recurrence of it in 2002. And she died from cancer at age 49 on June the 24th, 2006. She died at her father's house with her husband by her side. And she is buried there in the St. James Episcopal Cemetery in Marietta, Georgia, right next to little Jon Benet. Now, what is sad about this as well is that on July the 9th, 2008, 12 years after Jon Benet's death and 2 years after Patsy's death, well, the Boulder District Attorney cleared Jon Ramsey and Patsy of any wrongdoing in their daughter's death. That decision was based on, again, new DNA evidence that was collected from Jon Benet's clothing, and it belonged to an unidentified male, not a part of the family. Sad to me that Patsy was not around to hear the announcement of clearing the parents. So what about Jon Ramsey himself, Jon Benet's father? In 1989, he had formed an advanced product group. That company merged to be Access Graphics. He became the president and the chief executive officer of Access Graphics. This was a computer services that actually worked with Lockheed Martin. In 1996, that company grossed over $1 billion. Jon received recognition, the Entrepreneur of the Year, by the Boulder Chamber of Commerce. But after his daughter was murdered that same year, he was temporarily replaced because the company did not want to bother him about business matters as he grieved. Now, Ramsey, along with his wife Patsy, his young son Burke, they moved back to Atlanta shortly after the murder, and that company was later sold to General Electric. By the way, in 2015, Jon told in an interview that the investigation and costs of the case, well, had drained his finances. It was a tough time. And now today, Jon Ramsey, he's remarried. He's 80 years of age, but yet he's still focused on solving the mystery of who killed his precious daughter. Well, what about that other Ramsey that was there in the house? That's little Burke, 9 years of age at the time. You know, it's sad to say, but at various points, this tunnel vision even placed a lot of spotlight on him as a suspect in the murder. There was a documentary that reached out to Burke on Cold Case, but yet he declined to be interviewed. But his first public interview was actually in 2016, and that was to Dr. Phil. And in there, he said, "I know people think I did it, that my parents did it. I know that we were suspects." He said for a long time, the media basically made our lives crazy. He went on to say it was hard to miss the cameras, the news trucks in your front yard. He said we'd go to the supermarket sometimes and there'd be a tabloid with my picture and Jon Benet's picture plastered on the front. The world would just follow us around. Seeing that as a little kid, he said, was a chaotic nightmare. It made me a private person. Well, we do know that in 2016, CBS had a segment called The Case of Jon Benet Ramsey. That segment implied that Burke had killed Jon Benet. with no evidence whatsoever, just a theory. Burke then turned around and sued CBS for $750 million, saying they ruined his reputation. In 2019, that lawsuit was settled, unknown how much money that the CBS forked out. Today, Burke is 37 years of age. He lives outside the spotlight. Somebody said, is he happy? Well, he's happy as he can be, given the circumstances. That's what a source told U.S. Weekly. He is productive. He's moving past all the trauma, living the best way that he can. Now, here's something interesting about Burke. He doesn't read anything about the case, doesn't watch anything about it. If he sees the shows about it, he'll change the channel on TV. He's not the least bit interested in watching the documentaries. He now works as a software engineer for a mid-sized company, lives a quiet life. There is another brother, though, that is a little more involved, and that was John Andrew. He's John's son from a previous marriage. He wasn't living with the family at the time of the murder. He was 23 years of age. Today he's in his 50s. He does talk about it. He says about the Boulder Police Department, they did their damnedest to bring charges against John and Patsy, but there was nothing there. He said, we lost our sister, our daughter, a family member. We were victims. The very people we thought were going to come and protect us and help us were pointing the finger at us. We were just regular people. And all of a sudden, our world got turned upside down. He went on to say this 6-year-old girl was killed on their watch. It was their responsibility for finding the killer. They can do it. We want them to do it. Now, John Andrew has 2 other sisters. One of them died in a car accident. The other one kind of lives a quiet life. So let's talk about someone else. Detective Steve Thomas. He was the lead detective on the case at the time. He resigned from the Boulder Police Department in the summer of 1998. He's the guy I told you about last week that wrote a book about the case. Made some money off of it. He told Larry King, on Larry King Live, that he resigned because he felt like it was such a terrible, terrible case. It was going nowhere. Out of frustration, he said, I left the case. Now, Jon Benet's father, John, well, during that same episode, he slammed Thomas, said he failed in his responsibilities as a police officer. Today, as far as we know, he lives a quiet life himself, and there's 2 different stories. One says he works in real estate, lives in Florida. Another one says he lives up there and does carpentry work. And then, of course, the detective I mentioned last week was Detective Lou Smith. He died in 2010 at the age of 75. He was a Colorado detective, of course, who retired in 1996. And his work led him to over 200 murder convictions. He was recalled to work on the Ramsey case, but resigned 18 months later. There, he said, I cannot, in good conscience, be a part of a persecution of innocent people. That was when the police department was going after the family. At the time of his death, by the way, he was still investigating the case on his own. One other person that was involved was a guy by the name of Alex Hunter. He was the DA who refused to prosecute John and Patsy. His tenure ran from 1972 to 2000. And after a grand jury indicted Jon Benet's parents in 1998, he refused to sign the indictment papers, declined to prosecute, he said, for a lack of evidence. And here's what he said in an interview. He said, it was the right call by all of us working on the case. Not the popular call, not what the public wanted, but it was the right call. And he said, quote, maybe those people with time and reflection will say I had stuff to do the right thing. If that happens, great. If it doesn't, so be it. I'm going to be out snowshoeing. He lived a quiet life outside of the spotlight. He also told the Denver Post we should not give up on the case. All right, so that's a little bit about what's happened to a lot of the people. Now, I'm going to tell you how I think this case can be solved. One way is what we're doing right now, It's to keep the case alive. You see, if the case dies, the case more than likely will never be solved. Michael Tracy is a professor at the University of Colorado in Boulder. He was featured on the Netflix documentary. He said he became involved in the case in the early 1997, and the reason he was involved was not actually have anything to do with the murder. He said, I looked at the way in which the media were covering the case, the way in which culture was reacting to the case, the global culture, because he thought it was a global story. He said he was appalled by what he saw. It was unfair. The media was saying things that was full of lies, misinformation. It was an attempt to basically frame the family. Now, he says that he discovered all the power of Netflix. He said he had co-produced 4 documentaries, but Netflix got more attention in 24 hours than we did in 25 years. He said, I, along with other people, want to keep this case alive. You see, that's why we're doing this podcast today, to get the word out there. It's important to keep this case alive. This case can only be solved if it is kept current, if it's kept alive. If it dies, the opportunity to solve it dies. So let me encourage you, share this podcast, share other information on it. There's another way that this can be solved, and that is somebody could come forward who has knowledge of who the killer really is. Somebody somewhere knows something about this case that could lead to the solving of the case. As we say so often on this show, if you see something, say something. And if you do have information on Jon Benet's murder, you should call or email the Boulder Police Department. Call them at 303-441-1974, 303-441-1974 for the Boulder Police Department. Or you can email Boulder's Most Wanted at bouldercolorado.gov. We're going to put all this right there in the show notes for you. But the most likely way that this can be solved is for the Boulder Police to think outside the box, to reach out to the top-of-the-line labs that are available and can do wonders with DNA, things today that they could never do before. I have been told that there are many more objects that could contain additional DNA, and they could test these things in these outside labs. They need to find a good sample to upload to the ancestry platforms that will have the best chance to solve this crime. That is the key, I believe, to solving the crime. Let's hope that the Boulder Police Department will do more thinking outside the box. We know they have the motivation to solve this case. Let's encourage them to take that extra step. Get outside the box, talk to some of these outside labs, and do what needs to be done to solve this case. As John Ramsey himself said, it is not if, it is when that this case will be solved. Let's hope he's right. And until this time next time, this is Charlie Crimebuster saying, be safe, be alert. For the life you save, it may be your very own.
You have been listening to Charlie Crimebuster. You can find additional podcasts at charliecrimebuster.com. You can also support our first responders, military, and law enforcement communities at peacemakernetwork.com. Or subscribe to our YouTube channel using tag @CharlieCrimebuster. Even visit our Facebook page, facebook.com/CharlieCrimebuster. Or if you would like to make suggestions for future podcasts, please send your ideas to charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. That's charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope that you will join us next week for another exciting crime story with Charlie Crimebuster.